The house on Maple Drive looked exactly the same as it did the day I left. White shutters, overgrown rose bushes along the fence, the brass porch light my father had promised to replace for 15 years. I sat in my rental car at the curb for a long moment, engine running, watching the warm glow spill from the front windows. Inside, I could see shadows moving behind the curtains. My brother's engagement party had been going on for an hour already. I had been sitting outside for 20 minutes. I almost put the car in drive and left. Instead, I cut the engine. There's something uniquely painful about returning to a place that never really felt like home. The discomfort starts before you even open the door. Somewhere in your chest, a quiet tightening, like your body remembering things your mind has tried to forget. I had grown up in that house. I had eaten breakfast at that kitchen table, done homework on that living room floor, cried myself to sleep in the second bedroom on the left at the top of the stairs. And still, pulling the key from the ignition and stepping onto that sidewalk, I felt like a stranger preparing to knock on someone else's door. My name is Claire. I am 31 years old, and I had not been back to my family's home in 4 years. Growing up, there were 3 of us. My older brother Daniel, me, and my younger sister Lily. Daniel was the golden one. Varsity soccer, Dean's List, the kind of easy confidence that made adults smile and nod like he was already destined for something important. Lily was the baby, the creative one, the one my mother described at every family gathering as our little artist, with a pride in her voice she never quite managed when she talked about me. I was the middle child in every sense of the word, not exceptional enough to be celebrated, not young enough to be indulged. I was simply there, useful when needed, invisible the rest of the time. My father worked in insurance. My mother ran the household like a project manager. Schedules, expectations, outcomes. She loved us, I believe that. But love, in our house, was not distributed equally. It was allocated based on perceived potential. And for reasons I spent years trying to understand, I was never at the top of that list. When I was 14, I overheard my mother on the phone with my aunt. They were talking about college funds. My mother mentioned Daniel's account first, already over $60,000. Then Lily's, because she had a gift that needed nurturing. Then there was a pause. Then she said, "Claire is practical. She'll figure it out." I stood in the hallway for a long time after that. I figured it out. I worked through high school, part-time at a grocery store, then a coffee shop, then doing freelance web design for local businesses out of my bedroom on a laptop I bought with my own money. When I got into college, I applied for every scholarship I could find. When I graduated, I had less than $6,000 in student loan debt and a skill set I had built entirely on my own. My family came to the graduation ceremony. My mother took photos of Daniel and Lily with me as backdrop. After graduation, I moved to Austin. Not for any particular reason, except that it was far enough away and cheap enough to survive in while I built something. I had a plan. Not a grand vision, not a dramatic declaration. Just a quiet, stubborn certainty that I was going to be fine. More than fine. I started a small UX consulting business out of my apartment. 2 clients the first month, 6 by the third. By the end of the first year, I had a wait list. I hired my first employee 18 months in. A sharp 23-year-old named Marcus who could code faster than anyone I had ever met. By year 3, we had a team of 11 and contracts with 4 mid-sized tech companies. By year 4, we had been acquired, partially, by a firm in San Francisco, which gave us the runway to expand. I kept majority ownership. We rebranded. We grew. I did not tell my family any of this. It was not a deliberate secret at first. It simply never came up. My calls home were infrequent and short, holiday check-ins, birthday texts, the occasional Sunday afternoon call that my mother would end after 12 minutes when her show came on. Nobody asked about work beyond the surface. When I said things were going well, the conversation moved on. After a while, I stopped volunteering information they had never shown interest in receiving. I also changed the name of my company when we rebranded. The new name was my middle name and a word I had always liked. Nothing that would connect directly to me in a casual Google search unless you were looking. I had not planned it that way. It just happened and I left it. So when Daniel called me in September to invite me to his engagement party, I was operating on two separate tracks simultaneously. On one track, genuine happiness for my brother, who had been with his fiancée Sophie for 3 years and who, whatever our dynamic, I did not wish any harm. On the other track, a familiar bracing, the quiet preparation of someone who has learned to lower their expectations so far in advance that disappointment can no longer reach them. It would mean a lot to Mom and Dad, Daniel said on the phone. Not, it would mean a lot to me. Not, I want you there. It would mean a lot to Mom and Dad. I noticed that. I always notice things like that. I said I would come. I walked up the porch steps and rang the bell. My mother answered the door. She was wearing a navy dress and the pearl earrings she saved for occasions. She looked at me with an expression that took a half second to arrange itself into something warmer, that half second that only people who grew up in a house notice. "You made it," she said. "I made it," I said. She hugged me the way people hug someone they haven't quite missed. Arms up, quick packed, already pulling back. Then she turned and called into the house. "Daniel, Claire's here," before leading me inside without quite waiting for me to follow. The living room was full of people. Daniel's friends from college, Sophie's family, a collection of relatives I recognized and some I didn't. My father was by the fireplace talking to my uncle. He raised his hand when he saw me, a wave, a nod. Lily was on the couch with two of her art school friends laughing at something on her phone. She looked up, said, "Hey, you came," and looked back at her phone. I got myself a drink from the kitchen and stood near the doorway and watched the room. Daniel found me about 20 minutes in. He looked well. He always looked well. He gave me a better hug than my mother had, which I was grateful for. He introduced me to Sophie's parents, who were warm and effusive and clearly delighted about everything. I liked them immediately. Sophie herself came over and hugged me like we had known each other for years, which we nearly had by that point, though I had only met her twice. She was genuine in a way that was immediately apparent. "We're so glad you're here," Sophie said, and she said it looking directly at me, and I believed her. The evening moved the way these evenings move. Food was passed around, toasts were made, photographs were taken. I was in some of the photographs. In others, someone simply forgot to call me over before the shutter clicked. I was not surprised. I ate good food and talked to Sophie's mother for 45 minutes about her garden and a book we had both recently read, and I thought, this is fine. I can do this. Then came the gifts. I had not known there would be a gift portion. Engagement parties do not typically involve gifts, or so I had assumed. But Sophie's family, it turned out, had a tradition, and my family, apparently, had adopted it for the occasion. One by one, people presented Daniel and Sophie with envelopes and wrapped boxes and small sentimental tokens. It was lovely. I stood near the back and watched and felt the particular warmth of watching two people be celebrated. Then my mother stood up. She made a small speech about Daniel, about Sophie, about how proud the family was. She talked about Daniel's career, his character, his trajectory. She talked about how Sophie was already like a daughter. It was genuinely moving. My aunt was crying. My father had his hand over his mouth. Then my mother reached behind her chair and produced a flat jewelry box. Inside, as she opened it for the room to see, was a bracelet, delicate gold with a small diamond inset. A family heirloom. My grandmother's. I knew that bracelet. I had always known that bracelet. Growing up, I had asked about it once. I was maybe 12, sitting at my grandmother's kitchen table, admiring it on her wrist. My grandmother had smiled and said, "This goes to the woman in this family who needs it most." I had thought about that sentence for years afterward. I had understood, somewhere beneath conscious thought, what needs it most would eventually mean in the context of my family. My mother clasped it around Sophie's wrist to gentle applause. It was a beautiful moment. I clapped too. I meant it. Then my mother turned to the room and said, "And we also wanted to recognize the whole family tonight." She gestured to Lily, who stood up beaming. My mother handed her a small box. Inside, I could see from where I stood, was a pair of earrings. Silver, small, pretty. "For our artist," my mother said, and Lily hugged her. Then my mother sat back down. I waited. She began talking to my aunt beside her. The moment passed. I stood there holding my glass, and I did a very deliberate thing. I breathed in slowly through my nose and I breathed out through my mouth, and I told myself, this does not define your value. You already know your value. You built it. Nobody in this room can give it to you or take it away. But there was still a specific burn, low and steady, the kind you get not from shock but from confirmation. This was not new information. It was old information delivered, again, in a new setting. The data point was familiar. The sting was not lesser for that, Sophie noticed. I don't know how. I had kept my face carefully composed, but Sophie appeared at my elbow within minutes, her new bracelet catching the light. She touched my arm and leaned close and said, very quietly, I want you to know that I see you, and I'm really glad you're here. I looked at her. Thank you, I said. I meant that too. Later, my father found me in the kitchen. I was refilling my water glass and had been glad of the excuse to step away for a moment. He came in and closed the door behind him most of the way, and something in that gesture made my chest tighten with the old familiar brace. Here it comes, I thought. The ask. It always comes eventually. I wanted to talk to you, he said. Okay, I said. He was quiet for a moment. My father was not a man of easy words. He had provided for us materially and had shown up at the things he was supposed to show up at, but emotional expression had never been his language. Watching him search for words now was uncomfortable in the way that watching someone struggle is always uncomfortable. Your mother and I, he started. We haven't always. He stopped, pressed his lips together, tried again. I know that we have not always made you feel like we saw you the same way. I said nothing. I don't have a good explanation for it, he said. I want you to know that I know that. There's no explanation that would be good enough. I think we just... He shook his head. We had ideas about who each of you were. Early ideas, and we stopped looking as carefully as we should have. I thought about the phone call I had overheard at 14. I thought about graduation photographs. I thought about 100 small moments of being passed over that I had quietly collected over a lifetime like stones in a pocket. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. My voice was steady. Because you drove here, he said. You drove here, he said. You drove here and you walked in and you smiled and you stayed. And I know what that cost you. I looked at my father for a long time. It's not nothing, I finally said. What you just said, it's not nothing. He nodded. He looked older than I had remembered him. The skin under his eyes was looser, and his hair had gone fully gray at the temples. He had a look of a man who had recently taken stock of some account and found it short. I know it's not enough, he said. No, I agreed. It's not enough, but it's a start. He nodded again. He refilled his own glass. We stood in the kitchen together in silence for a moment, and it was not a comfortable silence, but it was an honest one, and that felt like more than we had managed in a long time. I went back to the living room. Around 9:30, the party was beginning to wind down when my mother appeared beside me. She had the particular energy of someone building towards saying something which I recognized from childhood, a kind of hovering, a circling. Are you seeing anyone? She asked first. No, I said. Still in Austin? Yes. And work is, she paused. You do the computer stuff, the design, something like that, I said. She nodded vaguely. There was a pause. You've always been so independent, she said. There was a complicated quality to her voice when she said it. Something that was almost admiration but had spent so many years being coded as criticism that it had lost its shape. I learned early, I said. She looked at me. She heard it. Claire, she said. Mom, I said. We looked at each other. I thought about the bracelet on Sophie's wrist. Sophie, who had known my family for 3 years, who was warm and good and deserved every beautiful thing she received. I had no bitterness towards Sophie. My bitterness, if that was even the right word, was smaller and more specific than that. It was the shape of a 12-year-old at a kitchen table asking about her bracelet, being told it goes to whoever needs it most. What had they thought I needed? I'm proud of you, my mother said. The words came out careful and deliberate, like she had taken them out of storage, examined them, decided they were ready. What for? I asked. I genuinely wanted to know what she thought she was proud of. She blinked. For managing so well. On your own. You could have been prouder of me while I was doing it, I said. That would have mattered more. It was the most direct thing I had said to her in 4 years, maybe ever. She was quiet for a moment. I know, she said. Lily drifted over and asked if I wanted to see photos from her most recent gallery show, and I said yes because I genuinely did, and the moment with my mother dissolved into the general tide of the evening. I looked at Lily's photographs on her phone. She was talented, genuinely, and I told her so with specificity, naming the images that struck me and why, and she seemed surprised by that. Not the compliment itself, but the attention. I thought, we have more in common than either of us has been allowed to know. Before I left, Sophie found me again. Can I give you something? She said. She was holding her phone. Daniel showed me your company's website once, a while ago. He didn't think I was paying attention. She smiled. I was paying attention. What you've built is incredible, Claire. I Googled you properly last week when Daniel told me you were coming. I read the profile in that business journal. I looked at her. I was going to mention it at dinner, she said, but it felt like it should come from you on your own terms, not from me making it a thing. I thought about my mother saying, the computer stuff, the design. I thought about 4 years of short phone calls and 12-minute conversations and the way information I never offered had never been sought. Thank you, I said. For that. The work you've done, Sophie said. The team you've built. The clients. I looked it all up. She shook her head. They don't know, do they? It was not quite a question. No, I said. Are you going to tell them? I considered this. There had been a version of this evening I had imagined, a version where at some point, I had produced proof of my life the way you'd produce a document, laid it on the table, watched their faces change. I had imagined it satisfying, in the way that imagined things often are, but standing there in my family's living room with Sophie's hand on my arm, I realized I did not need the room to fall silent. I did not need their faces to change. I had spent 31 years waiting for their perception of me to shift, and somewhere along the way, somewhere between the first client and the 11th employee, somewhere between the acquisition offer and the rebrand, I had simply stopped requiring it. The work was real whether or not they knew about it. I was real whether or not they saw me. Not tonight, I said. Sophie smiled. Okay, but maybe, I said, someday, when it's mine to give, not theirs to take. I hugged Daniel goodbye and told him I was happy for him, which was true. I hugged Sophie and told her she was going to be a wonderful addition to this complicated family, which made her laugh. I waved at Lily, who waved back and then held up her phone with my number visible. A question. I nodded. She saved it. I paused at the door where my mother was standing. I'm glad you came, she said. Me too, I said, and I meant that also, which surprised me a little. My father was just behind her. He put his hand briefly on my shoulder, just a moment, just a touch, and then let go. It was the most he had managed. For now, it was enough to acknowledge that he had tried. I walked down the porch steps and across the dark lawn to my rental car. The night was cool and quiet. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine. Through the front window I could see the party still going, the warm light, the moving shadows, my brother's arm around Sophie's shoulders, my mother laughing at something my aunt had said. I was not in that frame. But I had built my own frame. My own room. My own light. I started the car and drove back toward the hotel. There was a voicemail from Marcus when I got to the stoplight. Something about a new client inquiry, a company 3 times the size of anyone we'd worked with before. I would call him in the morning. I would sit in a hotel room and open my laptop and pull up the proposal I had been drafting on the flight here, and I would work, because work was the language in which I had always been most fluent, the one in which I had always been seen. I did not need my mother to know the name of my company. Not yet. Maybe not ever, and that would be all right too. What mattered was that I knew it, that I had built it, that 11 people showed up every morning because I had created something worth showing up for. The light turned green. I drove. Behind me, the house on Maple Drive got smaller in the rearview mirror, and then it was gone, and the road ahead was dark and open and entirely mine.